Taller from William Mary. And this workshop welcomes participants without prior digital humanities training. And I personally learned a lot from this workshop. So I'm sure Dr. Curtis will share more about this online workshop and other related projects in digital humanities today, right? So all three of our speakers have rich experiences and knowledge in this field. Without further ado, let's start with Dr. Choi. Dr. Choi, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let me share my slides, which I hope will be appearing on your screens any second. Do let me know if it breaks up or if it doesn't flip the page and so on. So thank you, Dr. Ren, for the kind introduction, and many thanks for the Chinese historians in the U.S. For inviting me. I'm really honored to have this chance to share a little bit about DH in the classroom and my own teaching. And it's rather late over here for me and Dr. Ren. So please bear with me if I begin to ramble, and I hope I won't. So in the coming 30 minutes or so, I'll be addressing these issues here to explain how my own teaching is driven by a vision to transform history education with digital technologies. So I'll be starting first with a little about how I came to have some exposure in history and DH, and explaining what this angle stands for or what it could do for the study of Chinese history, and then on to how we could use DH tools to help with our teaching, as well as to learn with our students in preparation for time in which Gen AI is part and parcel of their learning. And I'll end with some really, really quick thoughts on the state of DH and Chinese studies, especially Chinese history, especially geared towards teaching and learning. So a little bit about how I began this sort of thing. So my own training is in pre-modern Chinese history, especially in the middle period. And I first got some exposure to DH through text markup when I was doing my doctorate. I was helping my advisor, Hilda de Weert, tag some Song Biji texts, and she provided us with training in XML markup and the coding software Oxygen, and also TEI standards and so on. And after my doctorate, I did a postdoc for CBDB, the China Biographical Database, which is turning information about historical figures into digital data, which I will say a bit more in a while. And after that, coming back to Hong Kong to teach. And I began at CityU in 2019, so it really had been quite a time of many changes to teaching since my first semester here. And so my first contact with teaching at university began in the UK when I was a PhD student there. But I had zero pedagogical training back then, and I was asked to teach a tutorial course on Chinese urban history by myself. And looking back, this was intimidating, but it also turned out to be a blessing, I think, because I really had to think through how I am to teach from the bottom up. I learned to use a dialogic approach to guide my students. I had to ask a lot of questions about my students' work, and I explored, perspectives with them, pressed them to defend their reasoning, so on and so forth. And this sort of close and interactive contact is in a non-digital environment. It's an entirely non-digital environment in these tutorials. I did not use slides. We did not look at screens. We read the students' essays. We dribbled down notes. We talked. We asked and answered questions. So even when teaching much larger classes, I think I still remember part of that experience. I know how important it is to choreograph our discussions and learning together. And it's these things, these sorts of spontaneity and interactivity that make it worthwhile to spend time together and think together in the same space. But I also came to realize later that this also involves adapting the learning of this subject of history to show students that as the world changes, the ways of studying and thinking about history is also evolving rapidly, especially with digital tools and technologies. And to do this, I would sometimes like to think of my own teaching as centering on these four main things. And my idea is that these are like RAMs, really, just like in our personal computers. The more RAM you have, the smoother and the faster the processing will be. And I think these are things that make history learning more engaging and more effective. So these are first embracing digital research skills for studying the humanities, or well, DH in short. Um, and of course, it's about how history is not only for the students, not only burying or overburdening ourselves in the textbooks. It's also about using a data perspective and also sparking interest in the subject for students who might feel it is boring or irrelevant. And also, secondly, the interactivity that values the students' questions and the learning that they drive themselves, which I think really helps to change their view of how they learn history. Not as rote learning or memorization of facts as some students here in Hong Kong would perceive it or have experienced it in high school, but as an active exploration of data and sources. And thirdly, multiculturalism, global perspectives, I guess, needless to explain. But last but not least, the multilingualism that is so ingrained here for us in Hong Kong. So this involves helping students who do not know Chinese, such as the foreign students, as well as many locals who do need more confidence and practice in their bilingual skills, especially the shy and quiet ones. So here, I have to teach courses in all three languages: English, 普通话, and Cantonese. So really focusing on DH, of course. Today we are. And put simply, it's the cross pollination of humanities research, such as, in my own case, imperial Chinese history with digitization and digital methods. And for our field of Chinese studies, it is, of course, now a flourishing and interdisciplinary field after 3 to 4 decades of development. And not all the things that I will mention in a while are conventionally seen as DH, but I think this doesn't really matter too much as definitions of DH are also in flux. I'm sure there's some of you here in the Zoom session who are familiar with the debates about that, defining DH. But as China historians like us know too well, the adage, black cat or white cat, if it could catch mice, it's a good cat. And so DH and the more data-driven perspective on history, I'd say, is what I picked up, especially during my postdoc years when I was contributing and working for this database for Chinese historical figures called CBDB. So the possibilities of digitization and using data for studying history are tremendous. We as historians no longer only rely on textual sources, books and archives and images, but also, of course, their digitized form. And for instance, digitization has enabled us to visualize historical problems like this. Here in the slide, it's the geographical distribution of registered households in dark blue dots under the Han dynasty mapped out. And this, of course, could be easily compared to the light blue dots, which are from the Song dynasty. And we're talking about 1100 years apart. So dark blue for the Han, light blue for the Song. Originally, even for the most learned historians, it would be challenging to conceptualize or to compare these multivariate textual records in precise terms at the same time. But when visualized, they're much easier to describe and analyze. So if you could compare the two, of course, quickly, dark blue in Han, light blue in the Song, we as teachers and as students could then, of course, raise many questions about the distribution and coverage with the data. So, for instance, what regions was the Han more able to consolidate its rule and tax the population? And for instance, again, what do the concentration of the households in the South mean for the Song dynasty and so on? And then, of course, we could draw many clues with our students for making observations about Chinese history and imperial rule that spans across centuries. And also, of course, not only to take the data for granted, but also, think about what are the sources, that we derive this sort of data from, this sort of geographical data from. So of course, the lens of historical GIS is what I just talked about, but also other sort of perspectives such as the lens of social networks, also drawing from data that we have been working on from the database, the CBDB. And of course, social media apps are so much part of our students' lives, but for them, to experience how the ancients also had their social circles in which the historical figures were part of a community. So with this sort of historical data, we could map out the historical figures' social interactions, such as in this case, Zhu Xi, the philosopher's exchanges of letters with his intellectual partners and disciples and friends and colleagues. And we also could quickly find out, based on this sort of social network graph, which philosophers wrote him most often, and so on. And we could then trace the texts and see what they discussed, and also, come back to the graph and think about what that means for, let's say, the intellectual history of the period, and so on. So the development of these sorts of data sets and the use of lens of things such as historical GIS, social networks analysis, and so on. And using these to think about historical issues is part of what I have been doing. And since that sort of that job with CBDB, I've been trying to spread the DH paradigm in the especially in the Chinese-speaking world through events, talks, workshops, conferences, and and to really to spread this sort of knowledge. And I do so because I think DH pedagogy fits nicely with our current students' needs, especially when online education and access to digital materials is so integral to their learning mode. Of course, during the pandemic, but also after. And of course, we are all digital now, especially for our students. So I began my current job in 2019, and not long after that, my all my teaching switched to online on Zoom. And of course, those of you who are here as teachers, we have all been through that. But not only that quick and forced switch to online teaching, but more importantly, it's the people who we teach and whom we interact with. These are digital natives. So their default mode of learning and looking for information is digital and internet powered, and also usually mobile through smartphones. And so, as a DH and Chinese history scholar, I think my own duty is to help them learn history digitally, also in a way that is close to their lifestyle and their universe. So, an example that I would like to give um, and sort of an approach that I would like to talk about is this. So in our field of history, if we try to move our teaching online or sort of incorporate digital elements, sometimes the challenge is this. So in our own field of history, of course, reading seminars are very common, right? We take a crack at primary source together. These are usually important canonical texts, such as, for my own field, for instance, the Shiji, right? Which I just taught the past semester. So doing this in the same physical space is quite straightforward, and it doesn't have to be digital, right? It could be non-digital, it could be in traditional sort of paper-based formats, and they are effective, right? Every student could bring something unique to the reading of the text, and then we discuss, and we also sort of tease out the meanings and interpretations. But this sort of setting is all disrupted once we'd have to Zoom this sort of class. For instance, in the pandemic, of course. So back then, I knew I had to adapt. So one example of my approach is to recreate as much as possible that sort of reading-based discussion context using the digital resources that are available, and also tools such as CTEX. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this website or are already using it. This digital library called CTEX, Chinese Text Project, which is developed by Dr. Donald Sturgeon at Durham. And I also pair it with a great web page annotation tool that is open and free called Hypothesis. And it's a tool that allows you to annotate and comment on any part of a text on any web page, and share those within a group, such as the students in your course. And this sort of approach is what I quite like, which I quite sort of prefer to using online forums. It directs more focused attention to parts of the text, which in this sort of course should be the basis of the discussion and inquiry. So they are asked, that my students are asked to annotate the text, the readings, take notes of their questions and queries, mark notes there and discuss based on parts of the text. And in assessing this sort of strategy, I interviewed my students, and they showed to me how they've become more active in engaging with the text, both during class and also outside class time, especially including through the mobile versions of these um, web pages and the hypothesis tools on their smartphones, which I really didn't expect. At least for myself, these are sort of devices that are too tiny to read a text with. But of course, that's how our students roll. They are using their phones, they're commuting, they're reading this sort of readings, these sort of texts to prepare for class when they come to campus. And so for me, this approach proved to be really quite useful for augmenting our reading together. My shy students are able to voice their opinions about historical events and interpretive issues in these texts, and some of them feel more motivated with their access to these digital libraries and texts. And canonical historical sources no longer feel like an elusive puzzle because they're reading and discussing together among peers. And this is not only with myself, with the professor, but also with their classmates. They could stumble upon problems, of course, but they could share with other students. They annotate the text, not unlike how the ancient classicists have been making exegesis of texts, and this boosts their confidence and self-efficacy. And of course, they not only annotate text, but they also learn to map locations with GIS tools, look up digital biographies from pre-modern China using APIs, and tagging classical Chinese text with markers and so on. So really the tools and data sets that underpin these are not new technologies, but are only readily available to us in the recent decade or so. And there's now so much that could be done online, even without installing specialized software. So my own experience is this. It's really quite important to show what could be done with the digital tools, but not so necessary to run through every tool step by step. And the reason for that is because the tools are really so diverse. Unless you're teaching a very specialized class, there really would be too many things to fit into it. So my approach is to showcase examples and tools that impress me most, and then encourage the students to get their hands dirty and try various things. And after all, there are so many learning resources online, both in English and Chinese now, and some of them are geared towards Chinese studies, especially. Pointing to some of them will give the students an idea and be ready to be amazed by what they could do. And also, of course, making use of digital tools and databases does not mean we are throwing the traditional out of the way. So conventional learning methods in traditional formats, that are effective, of course, we still have to do them. For instance, bringing them to the library to have a hands-on session, having some sort of really non-digital time. So something I also trying to do is to instill immersive experiences into the learning of my students, such as making podcasts that feature interpretive storytelling about history. They enrich the learning experiences of the students, but they're also designed to fit into our busy lives, as they could be enjoyed when we multitask, which everyone is always doing. And I'm really proud that my students create these wonderful podcast series. So this year, I supervise some students to create a podcast about stories of women along the Silk Road, using themes to appeal to their peers, such as 穿越, right? Time travel and tomb raiding and ghost stories. And really, after all, seeing students having the ability to do these fascinating and inspiring things are what we try to achieve as history teachers, really. So these are just examples of their work. So moving on, as we sort of adapt to our technologically driven times, how we need to tackle um, uh, history teaching also has to adapt. And many of you, I'm sure, are using Gen AI apps such as ChatGPT, and also your students, I'm sure, are already using them. So the large language models and chatbot technology, in my view, is going to completely transform the text-based instruction that underpins our humanities fields. And as educators, particularly as those who teach text-focused subjects, we need to embrace AI to ensure that history and the humanities remain relevant and engaging. And in my view, this will require a proactive approach to curriculum design, especially with a focus on revising assignments and assessment. And also, of course, ensuring that we do not discard valuable traditional methods in the process. So we must recognize that some types of assignments no longer work as much unless they're redesigned as AI-driven learning tasks. These include text summarization tasks, generic essay questions, or even student presentations to some extent, and assignments that rely heavily on fact-finding combined with rote learning. And on the other hand, there are assignments that still work well, relatively well, or even better in the current educational landscape with students' adoption of Gen AI apps. These include in-class exercises, pen and paper, and closed book exams. But of course, not just going back to these paper-based settings that preclude AI. There are also activities that would work better, such as the critiquing of AI-generated responses and engaging students in formulating or refining questions through an interactive dialogic process between the professor and the student. And additionally, tasks such as reverse engineering the evidence or proof or references of an AI-generated text can also enhance critical thinking and analytical skills. And to be sure, we are living with AI and the information that is spit out. And so a project that I'm working on is aimed at improving students' analysis of claims and evidence through building their information literacy and historical reasoning. And I'm also redesigning and publicizing course assignments to incorporate the use of chatbots in learning. So this other project of mine that aims to change the teaching of history by leveling the playing field for student learning with the use of AI. So for instance, my essay assignments are being revised into tasks that involve critiquing and fact-checking and improving AI-generated responses. Or, for instance, training chatbots to imitate a historical figure, such as in this example here. 唐太宗. Um, uh, Students could, of course, then ask the chatbot questions and poke holes in its answers or reasoning. These approaches not only foster uh, critical thinking, historical reasoning, but also actively engage students in the application of historical knowledge. And really, sort of the idea here is to enhance our history classes and lessons with AI powered chatbots. So I introduced chatbots in these sessions, allowing them to compare generated content with traditional sources, challenging them to think critically about AI hallucinations and misleading information, and so on. So interactive role playing, I mentioned that already. And in what I like to call turning the tables, I design assignments that ask students to become examiners, to come up with quiz questions for chatbots, and to think of questions that will make chatbots fail the Turing test, and show to us that they are machines and not humans. And it's also crucial for students to understand how AI constructs its narratives. So by asking them to reverse engineering the sources and the references and reasoning of AI, students could identify the biases and learn the importance of questioning sources, and also engaging with AI that mimics historical figures or tweak AI generated texts also help to deepen their understanding of history and also of Gen AI. And we talk about these issues in a podcast. So I was discussing this with some friends, and if you're interested in these sorts of issues, do feel free to listen to this podcast episode. I'll paste the URL in the chat bot in the chat box in a while. And being mindful of time, and this is my final section, which really is really a quick section, to plug some of my own thoughts about DH pedagogy and research and Chinese history. So basically, the debates that have been going on about DH begun really formally from the 2000, the late 2000s and early 2010s. So I write about some of these debates and basic assumptions in a piece here. And I also then go on to trace the history from 2009 onwards. Before the history from 1980 to 2009, which I call the prehistory of DH in the Chinese world. So before the coining of the term in the Chinese context, and from the year 2009 onwards, the paradigm was formally introduced. And of course, the process of this paradigm going mainstream and impacting historical research. This is what we are currently looking at. So I also talk about these in some other papers, number 3 and 4. And looking ahead, these also involve the building of research platforms, the sharing of data standards, and also the building of cyber infrastructures, which I write about with some colleagues, which we would like to think as the future of DH for Chinese studies. And also some of the issues that I've talked about here with teaching, such as the building of DH training sessions or workshops or courses, or even sort of bigger attempts at institutionalization. And some of the approaches that I've mentioned today, I also write about in papers here, which I'll paste the link in the chat box in a second. But mindful of time, I know I've used up my time. And just to really wrap up, these digital tools are transforming the way that we teach history. And they really do help make it dynamic, relevant, and anything but boring. So I'm really excited to share these explorations of mine, and I hope we could discuss and I'll be happy to send over links and materials, the stuff, any of the stuff that I mentioned. But let me just end here and make time for our other two speakers. Thank you, and I'll paste the links that I've just mentioned just now.
Thank you. Thank you, Li Hong, for the generous sharing. I will start to read your articles after this event, and I want to finish reading your students' Chunyu story, actually. It seems very fun. Okay, Wanshu, please. Our second
Hi.
speaker, yeah.
Thanks so much. Hi, how are you? Just let me share my screen.
Okay.
Give me a second. Oh, hello everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, hi, how are you? I'm
Yes.
sorry being late. This is hi. I'm Shuwan. Before the presentation, just a brief before the presentation, I want to briefly introduce myself. So I'm Shuwan. You can see here I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University at Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo. So the topic of my presentation today is how hybrid humanity pedagogy, and now I will explain what is hybrid pedagogy and its use in making history classroom comparing to the Generation Z, Gen Z kids again. So that's a big issue in my view for humanity, not only history instructor, but humanity instructor in the United States today, just how to bring the attention of those Generation Z kids back to the classroom, make history in a general sense, humanity class interesting to those young college students again. So, so the first thing I want to briefly introduce is what the concept, the term, hybrid pedagogy. So this one is here is the official definition provided by the main promoter or activist.
Wanshu, I cannot
I'm
see
sorry.
your screen. Sorry, I'm sorry to
Um,
interrupt you, but it seems like we cannot see your screen.
can you
Oh,
see my
yeah, it
screen?
works now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So here's title. So here's my first slide. So here's like a J. Stomer, the major the leading figure in these pedagogical movements across the United States today in humanity. According to his definition, um, a hybrid pedagogy, in my personal view, it means that we can break, college instructors try our best to break down the boundary between online teaching or digital pedagogy and the on-site or in-person pedagogy or classroom. So we can try to use a lot of the educational technology, digital resources, and the digital humanity tool back to into the classroom. It's become a big issue, especially after the pandemic. As everybody here, we know during pandemic, or at least for 1 year or 1.5 year, most American college have to transit teaching from on-site to hybrid or fully online. So during the process, lots of college instructors recognize the potential of digital tool, a digital humanity tool, digital resources in transforming or changing the traditional landscape of a history classroom, including me. So here is my story. Before talk about my practice, today I'm different from the first presenter, giving us a very both I mean, presentation combining practice and case example and a very insightful theoretical thinking. My presentation will just bring some case, no case study, but some case in which I tried to introduce digital humanity, try to digital tool of digital pedagogy into my in-person class in the past few years. So, but before that, I want to tell the story why I take interest in digital humanity and the digital hybrid pedagogy. So here's my story. Well, now I'm a PhD student in history, but a few years ago, just during pandemic, the first year of a pandemic, I was in the library school. So, but before library school, I was in history. So I have a I mean, unusual journey from history to library school, information science, in other words, and back to history. So because of this journey, I mean, compared to most of pure proper historian, I personally take strong interest in the use of technology, educational technology, information technology in changing in changing the teaching of history. So here's an example, just like you know, in the context of library school of info, librarianship, there's a instructional role like a reference librarian or instructional librarian. So for this position, those librarians, they may teach some classes like information literacy, like some class about how to use library resources to undergraduate students. So during my enrollment in library school, I do a student job, like I work as a instructor librarian, student librarian there, and try to teach like as I mentioned the information literacy class to humanities to undergrad student at the University of Iowa. So within that process, I mean the combination of my work experience and my coursework in library school rendered me recognize the potential of like a technology, like a visual novel or whatever, in in teaching like teaching some humanity thing like some information skill to students. So when I return to the world of historical research, I try to borrow those ideas, those experience or skill I learned from my past experience in lab school into my current job. I mean, as a current teaching job. So including you can see in the following slides, on the following slide, I try to use some such so-called fancy tools in my classroom. Another reason why I think highly of a hybrid of digital hybrid pedagogy and digital humanity in a history classroom is because my experience during the pandemic, as you can hear, here is one of my publications, OPED application is in the academic blog called Hybrid Pedagogy. So in which I say, okay, I mean I say, oh, I'm a person suffering from social anxiety, so I'm shy all the time. I prefer, from my perspective, I think the virtual zone-based class, zone-based teaching is better for me from my perspective as a student. I prefer that. I feel much more comfortable. I feel much more comfortable in taking a class at home instead of stay with 20, 30, 40 students together in a large classroom. That's a horrible thing for me. I don't think that's an efficient way for me to learn something new. The best way is just stay at home and I'm alone, physically alone at home to take the class. So based on my experience, I write this one in my class. But another thing I mentioned in my article say, I recognize like during pandemic, instructors, especially humanities instructor, library instructor, were were forced because of pandemic. We had to transit everything online, so we have had to use more digital tools in the classroom. But in the process, I think, oh, that's a better way, better idea. Why not? When we return, when so-called we back to normal, when we return to the the on-site normal class teaching, why do we use more, I mean, keep using more digital tool, interactive pedagogy in the classroom? So as a result, both my experience in digital humanity and hybrid pedagogy and my personal my personal experience during pandemic, I become a passionate. I won't say I'm passionate. I don't want to. I will say I dare not to say I'm a digital humanity practitioner, but I'm passionate for digital humanity, and I apply to serve on the editorial team of Digital Humanity Quarterly to do some to take advantage of those quantitative research skill I learned from life school in helping the other editor in analyzing this bibliographic data, bibliometric data. So that's my story. So because of my experience, personal experience, my educational background and my work experience, I'm I'm big fans of digital humanity. I'm big fans of digital tools and try my best in when teaching, when either work as an instructor, class instructor or teaching assistant because I'm still a PhD student. I try my best to introduce those things into my classroom. So no, so that's and then this another reason beside my personal experience background, another reason I try my best to integrate digital tool, digital humanity into classroom is because according to my personal very limited teaching experience, I think most of my student, at least my student, or in other words, those students in my classroom, they prefer the new fancy style of teaching. So here's one, let's, from my personal experience to be a background, we all know humanity and the teaching of humanity has been in crisis in the United States, have been in crisis for at least 30 or 40 years. We even can trace back to Alan Bloom's famous book, The Closing of American Man. While I know he's a like right-wing philosopher, a scholar, but I think it's, while I want to say I disagree with some of his critique on American higher education, but that's true. It's a big issue. Like student don't want to read a big book anymore. Actually, it's true from my personal observation. I noticed that yes, my students don't want to read a big book anymore. Even some short book, few page reading are becoming much very difficult or overwhelming for students, and especially the Generation Z student, Gen Z kids. They don't like reading. Most of them, I think, most of my students belonging to the group Generation Z, they don't like reading at all. But I'm teaching history class, a humanity class. I have, I mean, I cannot say, oh, you don't need to do any teaching, or you don't need to do any writing. It's impossible, but they don't like it. So here is, well, in this sense, I would say we are in a permanent crisis. Well, it's over 30 or 40 decades. Now we're still in a crisis even worse in terms of the teaching of humanity in America, according to my personal experience. Here's an example. The first time I worked as TA a few years ago for the Asian civilization, Asian pre-modern Asian history class. In my college, it's called Asian Civilization 1. So in the class, of course, we teach like Chinese, an Asian philosopher in the age of Aces. But my student told me, oh, it's interesting, the class is very interesting, but I personally recommend you can assign this video to student. You can Google this video. You guys can Google YouTube, you can find this video. It's like a rap, just like just like talking about the difference between European and Asian philosophies in raps, and you can imagine who is this guy in the video in the rap MTV. It's Sun Tzu, but it's crazy. When I watch this video, I think it's crazy. Wow, that student is very good student. His performance in classroom is very good, but he really taught me like, okay, from for him or for his people in his generation, they think this kind of video is much more compelling. It's crazy. I want to say I feel very upset. Why, compared to my teaching, my students think this kind of, I mean, my selected reading for them, this kind of, well, popular, but popular but not so good material is good for them to learning. I mean, learning history, learning intellectual history. But the student, a Korean American student, really taught me. He think that's why it's much interesting. It's interesting than the class, than the reading. So here is the issue: how to deal. I mean, that's a fact. Like people, young kids in our state in this age, they like this kind of. They like TikTok. They like YouTube. They don't like reading. They think reading is very boring. A lot of them will say they really think it's boring. Reading is boring, but we have to face the fact we have to do something to make return to title of my presentation, how to make history class comparing student young, I mean Gen Z's kids comparing to them again. That's a big issue. So here's my prioritize. One prioritize is that I think most of you, I mean, attendance here, you know Padlet. You may know Padlet. If you don't know, you may Google. So I may briefly introduce Padlet here, but anyway, so Padlet is a platform you can use that to post. You can use make post here. You can create. I mean, the discussion in the format of BBS. We know BBS is like an older thing in the early history of internet, but BBS 讨论版 in Chinese. We can use this kind of thing in the platform. Here's a platform, yeah, in which in the poster, everybody can, just like a traditional poster, everybody can post their opinions there, and everybody others can see each other's student and participants in the platform can see each other's poster or opinions, commentaries there. Everything are open. So in my class, last when I work as TA for the American history class in my institution, it's called his HRIS. You can see HRIS 162. I noticed that I create such a poster, open forum. Students can post their opinion on their reading, their reflection on reading layer, which is required. Because I taught students, say, okay, usually for history classroom, participation is a big issue, right? I taught students, but according to my teaching experience, adult students are shy, maybe for other reason. They don't like participate. They rarely raise their hand in the classroom. They rarely say something. Even some students, they say something. They talk a lot in classroom. Well, it's good, but their talk are meaningless. Meaningless. I noticed. I just a lot of irrelevant information there instead of, I mean, those their talk are always not regard reading itself, reading themselves. That's a big issue. So I request students say, okay, I know for whatever reason you guys don't like to talk in the classroom, to participate in class discussion. So here I can give you option. Beside the traditional raising hands discussion, there's a online discussion. You can post your opinion here. You can just say, oh, what's your summary? You can post a summary of reading, your critiques of the reading, or whatever you want to say about reading, your reflection or whatever. So especially because here is a background, I'm a disability historian. So I recognize, and I am suffer, I'm often, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm suffer of social anxiety. So I realized as some students, they maybe like me, they feel shy, they feel uncomfortable in talking in the public. So I give them the option, a plan B or an alternative option to join the class participation. And another thing, I recognize that it's easier to students to manage, to organize their word, their thoughts, their ideas in writing down instead of speaking out. So I tell students, I want to see you um you reading you thought on the reading instead of say, oh, that's a good reading, I really like it. No, it's not allowed in this in the poster in my classroom. In the class discussion, you can do that. You can do that. It's allowed, but in the writing assignment, in this kind of written class participation, is not allowed. So I use the digital tool, like that's what I call hybrid pedagogy. So I allow students to, well, it's an on-site class. It's, I work as TA for this class like last summer, so it's after the pandemic. So I still require students to do this thing in the classroom. Even I told students, okay, in my classroom as TA, in my discussion or recitation session, okay, it's not only allowed, it's encouraged to use iPhone, use laptop, use pad or whatever those electronic devices in the classroom. Even if you say, I wish when I teach a class in my classroom, I even keep the poster open. I mean, on the screen, and I mean, even project the screen on the blackboard. I just say, okay, if you want to join the discussion in the classroom, but you feel shy, you feel uncomfortable in speaking loud, please just post something there. We can join you. Well, you can post, you can writing your idea, and everybody can see your idea together, and we can discuss your idea. So this is what I mean is a hybrid pedagogy. So we use a lot while we still teaching in the classroom in person, but I try my best to use lots of digital tools, digital resources. Here's So this one is like last summer, I teach a class is China in the war. So when I design a class, I recognize, oh, that's a big issue is that based on one of my students' feedback to my class, who told me like, okay, why do you think about like integrating those video game about history, like Total War, whatever, there's a lot of some or whatever into your class. So I think, yes, that's a good idea, but that's a big issue. We may say paywall, whatever. A lot of game is very expensive now in Steam, even like $20 or 30 or even $100. It's not a good idea. Well, it's not. I don't want to say they are not affordable for my students, but it's not a good idea for me to teach a class. For me as an instructor to require my students. Oh, you need to pay $100 to buy a Steam video game for completing assignment. So I search and found the game here is it's a like a beta version of the game is free. It's a demo. You can see it's a demo. I just say a student, okay, you play a game. In a game, you can be the lead. You can be a king during during the age of during the warring states, and you can learn you can learn how the interstate relation during a warring state in China history, the very important period of Chinese history. After that, you can see here is the design of the assignment. After playing the game, here I require my students to write down their reflection. Oh, what's the difference? What's the difference from like you learn from game and what you learn from classroom and from class and the reading? So my students give me very interesting discussion, not only about the difference, and they try to understand. They still playing game. They try to understand how the political, the international interstate relation between different states during a warring state periods. That's very interesting. And then my student told me this kind of interactive way of teaching is very good. It's very compelling to them. They think, oh, history could be so interesting. their feedback is very, I mean, make me very happy. I feel very comfortable, very happy to hear this kind of feedback because that's what I want. It's my goal is to make my class comparing to the student again, because as I mentioned, those kids in this generation, in the age of STEAM, in the age of TikTok, they feel much better to learn something new through games, through TikToks, those short videos, so those fancy interactive way. While people in my generation, I'm in my early 30s, or older generation, saying, "Oh no, that's no good idea." But we, but the fact is that the reality is that we have to take those students' own interest into account as instructors. Is very, I think it's very important. Well, we needed to take serious of their needs. Well, we may say, oh, you guys are young, so you don't know reading is the best way to learn history in a certain sense, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to judge their learning style. So here's a certain example. As I mentioned, my students all time beside their I don't want to say they hate reading. Beside their I mean they are low I mean they are limited interest in learning history through reading. They also tell me that's a common feedback from my students. Oh, why you in your class there's so many writing assignment. I don't like it. I don't like, especially because I always teach like a general education class. A lot of my students they come from like STEAM background. They say, wow, in maybe in common science we don't have such large writing assignment. Well, large means 5 pages. They say it's very large. Well, I don't think it's large at all. I think for most of attendance here, we don't think it's a big, it's overwhelming. But my students, they really taught me not only one or two or three, but like over 10 students taught me in different classes. They, well, 5 page, 6 page, very overwhelming, a huge challenge for them. So their feedback encouraged me to think about how to change in the traditional form of writing assignments. So one of my attempts, I would say my attempted solutions to integrate the interactive writing in the classroom. Here example, like in certain science people call visual novel. So here is example like there's a tool called Twin in which you can add a picture, you can add some like interactive function features or function into the writing. So in the writing class, is in English department, in creative writing department, in those programs, a lot of instructor, I'm pretty sure in the United States at least, lots of instructor in English department, in creative writing, in non-fictional writing, the program, rhetorical programs. They have already used Twin in designing their writing assignment for like for one at least 1 decade, but it's still rare among historians. I'm pretty so, but I learned that from my colleague in the writing program. So there's an instructor writing program. He teach like writing for new media writing. He designed like a twin-based writing assignment in which student can say you can design a writing like a game. You have option. You can the different there's a game like for example there are different choice in the talk. There are different choice in a novel. Well, it's a novel, but it's an active novel. So there are different options. So different you can and the reader can click option A, B, or C, and the different option may lead to a different ending. So that's a logic. So I tell student, okay, you can now I design this kind of assignment in which I tell student, you can imagine you are some big name, you are some emperor or king in the ancient Asian history. You can be Yongzheng, you can be whatever, Yongzheng Emperor Yongzheng, you can be whatever, and then you can choose the different option in some big decision, how those decision in like Chinese or Asian history, and you can talk about how this option, how this big decision leads to which kind of result. And if at that moment, like a counterfactor, now counterfactor option, like maybe if he at that moment the emperor didn't choose that option, what will happen then? So my student told me this way. I just want to encourage students to think about how I mean the alternative road of history could have, how the history could be different if something didn't happen at that moment, whatever. And my student told me in the in the general education class, my student told me it's very interesting. Again, they like this kind of writing. Well, in this one, they don't need to do a lot of coding, but most part of, because they need to write down the dialogue between like emperor of different like the narrative, it's like a historical novel in which the student were required to write down a historical novel and dialogical history novel in which like there's a lot of talk between emperor and the different minister, different officers. So my students say it's very interesting. So it's again, I want to say I'm not the first person to try to do that. Of course, even I'm not the first historian try to do that. It's very popular among professors or faculty members, English department in creative writing, in non-fictional writing. But the historian still, I want to say, according to my personal knowledge, it's not popular among historians. But I personally very encourage my peers try to use that in the classroom. It's very easy to use. It's not big. It's not challenging at all. Student just if they want to use the basic function, student just need like a basic knowledge of HTTP and HTTP and the CSS, those coding knowledge, programming knowledge. They could do that. It's not big issue. So here's another example. So one big thing, according to my past experience, attendance. That's a big issue. Taking attendance, big issue. Wow. All time, the first time I work as TA, and then I work since the first time I work as TA, and then working as an instructor. I don't want to take attendance, but it's required sometime in some university. So I try, and my student told me like, oh, taking attendance is so boring. Why do you try some alternative way for taking attendance? No, just write down my name, or even just like do something similar like a quiz or traditional pop quiz for attendance. So I use the Kahoot. Yes, I'm pretty sure some of the person here, some of I mean listener or attendants here, you guys attend this here. You guys know Kahoot if you, maybe from you kids class, So it's very popular among K to 12 education in the United States. A lot of I mean elementary or middle school teachers they use Kahoot, especially for language class. They use Kahoot to teach vocabulary to test the vocabulary of students, a grammatical knowledge of English of other languages in the elementary in the context of elementary and middle school. But I use that in my classroom. While in college classroom, here's an example, and in which I try to combine both reading and uh, and attendance. Here's example. So this question, I think everybody knows the answer here, know the answer, but for my students, it's not easy. And some of them, they learn knowledge after reading the chapter I assigned to them, after reading the textbook. Even so, you'll say here, even so, in this one, I told my student, you don't need to take attendance in my class, but you need to take the quiz. It's not a pop quiz. It's required every time. At the beginning of the class, we take a quiz. All the questions here, example, all the questions based on either the notes last week or last time or the reading for this week, for this class. So I want to use the Kahoot-based quiz both for attendance, taking attendance, and testing students' knowledge of their knowledge of the reading. of their historical knowledge. So we can see here the question is so easy. I assume it's so easy, but the fact is that even for this kind of question, in my classroom, usually like 30 or 40 students, at least 1/4 or 1/5 of them could make the wrong error, couldn't make a wrong answer. So for that, I choose the picture as a hint. So you can see here, clear is like a Mongolian man, strong Mongolian man. I hope student can learn that, can understand the hints, strong even, but so I try my best to encourage students to remember still this kind of quiz, the digital tool in my classroom. I use that in both, as I mentioned, both taking tests and testing students' knowledge, students' comprehension of the reading. So that's my way. And the student told me what I learned from my student. They say it's so cool. I think when I say when they say it's so cool, I think it means they like it. Well, personally speaking, I'm not belong to Generation Z, but I think this kind of thing is so boring. It's not make any sense. But the reality is that my student told me it's very cool. They think, oh, it's make attendance sheet. It's much better than the traditional attendance sheet. But so I have to, while I belong to another generation of students, I belong to another older generation, maybe Generation Y, but I have to adapt myself into the need of my student in the Generation Z. They like this kind of thing, even we think it's not a good idea. Even we think it's very silly, looks this kind of design is very silly, but it's really compelling to my student according to my experience. They really like it. They think it's very cool. So here's another option, another example is based on my experiment. Pedagogical experiments. I use TikTok. I don't know how other instructors use TikTok, but again, this idea also not come from literature, not come from somewhere, not out of nowhere, but come from the feedback from my student. My student, as I mentioned, the student suggested me to use this kind of rap to teaching intellectual history. He also told me like, why not use TikTok in the classroom? And then following his suggestion, I think okay, that's two options. Option one is like okay, I use some TikTok resources, some resources available in TikTok, integrate them as a primary resources or secondary resources into my classroom. But to go through those history related talk, I think most of them so their quality is no good at all. It's questionable. There, so I don't think it's a good idea. They are not reliable. Most of them, I have to say, they are not reliable. And even it's very funny. I don't use TikTok at all. But for my student suggestion, I think about wow, my student, if they like TikTok, I will try to understand them. They like to present their idea to report their life in
I
TikTok.
know Spice Girl. Do you know what girl power means to me? Sarah Vaughan, Lauren Hill.
Hello, hi. Sorry, I don't know what happened. Wanshu,
Hi.
hi, sorry. Someone just speaking.
No, I
Yeah,
think we don't have time, right?
yeah, we hit the 30
Yeah, I just
minutes.
finished here. So TikTok is one option. So try that. Students really like it. They like TikTok. It's very interesting for presentation. They can do TikTok based assignment in which they talk about some figure in the Asian history of science, and they really welcome it. And they say it's very cool. Again, they say it's very cool. They have very limited vocabulary. They think everything is good. When they say everything is good, they say it's cool. And that's my standard, my criteria for which kind of assignment is welcome by my student. So I try to be a cool college, cool history instructor, and I think I succeed in doing that. So last is just want to briefly talk about last one. So I think the first presenter talk about AI, use of AI in history. So here example, I highly recommend everybody think about that. So here's example. Here's it's a game available on Steam, and it's the AI. Most of dialogue, most of and content, especially dialogue in the game, is created by AI. I'm now thinking about how could we use that. We can ask students to design some history themed game as an alternative assignment in which most dialogue may be created by AI. But we can, and so I personally recommend everybody think about this one. I think that one will be the future of history. I mean, hybrid of digital pedagogy in the future. Thank you. In
Thank
history,
you,
I mean.
Shu. Yeah, thank you so much for the generous sharing. Actually, many of the like the